Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to look at brain scans and brain imaging. This is something I really hadn't covered in the past, but I'm seeing so much more on it. I mean, we mentioned it in class, talk about MRIs. I've shown you my brain on an MRI, which is, I mean, what else can you say? That's just super exciting. But there's a couple things I think that are pretty simple that if you keep these in mind, it's going to make this a lot easier. So we're looking today at how you can see inside the brain to look for really two things: function and current processing of the brain, and the second thing is really structure. So is there something with the structure of the brain that's improperly working, and maybe that explains someone's behavior or symptoms or problems that they're having. So I know we talked about this in class. The Muse album, The Second Law, showed all the neural processing imaging in a certain brain, and all the little lines there that you see are, you know, different neural connections, or at least they're being shown as that in a brain. So this would be the front part of the brain here, and that's the back part, and here's the spinal cord, or the, you know, that leads to the central nervous system. So interesting stuff there. And I think I mentioned in class that as people connected to the website and added themselves to it to look forward to this new album coming out, they would add another like neural connection. So slowly, as fans were anticipating it, the album cover was being revealed. So I thought that was pretty interesting. The top one up here is another way you can view the neural connections of the brain. So this is just a computer like building patterns of where it's finding neural connections. I think that was one I found out there at Duke University. They had an imaging there. And the bottom spot here is Pearl Jam album, and it's got a brain right there in the middle. I think it's supposed to be sort of like JFK's brain stayed alive, or maybe it's the group consciousness of the group. I say JFK because they did a song called Brain of J. That's basically what it was about. But this group consciousness where they're all kind of plugged in together, maybe sharing the same brain, a collective consciousness. That's off their last album. The new one's coming out here shortly, so I'm kind of excited about that. Let's look at the 5 primary ways to examine the brain. And as I'm doing that, I'd like to mention this and talk about it. If you've seen the movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise, it's kind of a sci-fi futuristic film, and it's very interesting that what they can do with the computer screen with moving their hands to manipulate the screen. And this was sort of before like the cell phone and touch manipulation of the cell phone and touch screens. I think it was before that, I'm pretty sure. But they had this idea that just by wearing these gloves you would be able to manipulate the screen. I mean, we're already able to do that in a lot of different ways. If you have an Xbox, you can use the Xbox camera that connects and do the same kinds of things. And you need the gloves, they just read your body motion. But to go a little deeper with it, what they were able to do in this movie, and you can see it on the little seal that they have on there, it says Department of Pre-Crime, District of Columbia. So this is a group of people who work for the government who knew the crimes you were going to commit before you actually did them. So they would come to your house and arrest you for something you haven't even done yet, but they could read brain scan technology, and they had this cognition where they could see in the future. And we don't have that. We do have some pretty fascinating things there, so we'll kind of come back to this at the end and think about what can we currently do with brain imaging, and maybe what we can do in the future. So there's 5 different ways: the EEG, the CT, which sometimes we call a CAT scan, the PET scan, which isn't a CAT scan, but it's a cat's a pet, I know. The MRI and the fMRI, and those are the 5 I think you should really know for the test. I think there are some others, but these are the ones that I think you should be focused in on. So I have them labeled there for structure and activity. These aren't perfect. I mean, like the fMRI can see some structural damage as well, because it's an MRI. MRIs can do that. But it really looks at blood flow and can see where someone is doing brain processing kind of on the fly. You could ask them questions, and they can be working on, and you can be working at viewing their brain and how it's functioning. So Let's first look at EEG, the electroencephalograph, and this measures brain waves and electrical activity. So you have sensors on your head, and with a skull cap or individual electrodes, you can measure brain activity. This is something that they did with me for MS testing, and it was really interesting. They had a grid set up, so I would have all these all over my scalp, really, and they had like little glue things, temporary glue things that would stick it on there. So they were all over my head. And I'd look at a screen. This is like the oldest computer screen like known to man. It was so old, CRT, little cheap thing. And it had a black and white grid on it. And the black and white, it's like a checkerboard or a chessboard. And so, but what it would do is the whites and the blacks would keep flipping. So there'd be a little square that would turn white, black, and the whole board was doing that at once. Then they put a little red dot, which was on a, I don't know, like a cord. It was the cheapest looking thing ever. And it extended down there right in front of the screen. And the red dot would flash. And they were trying to measure brain activity based on that. Like, I guess what they were looking to see is, does my brain notice that that red dot is flashing and is a signal getting to my brain quickly? You may say to yourself, well, what's that have to do with MS? But remember, it's the optic nerve that they were probably measuring the most, and then also like optic processing, because I was having a lot of dizziness issues when I wasn't sure what was wrong, and that's basically one of the tests that they can do. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but not necessary that you know the name of it. What can you do with this? Well, you can measure people's sleep patterns. So that's coming in the next unit. We'll look at consciousness, and we'll be able to see all the different brain waves. And deep sleep would be delta. A deep meditating or dreaming sleep would be theta. And then your visualization and meditation is the alpha waves. Wakefulness is beta. And the gamma is that heightened perception. So we don't really need to know that for our biology test, but it's important to know that you're talking about capabilities with the EEG that we don't have with some of these other scans. So although it's not a brain scan as it is typically thought, because you're not looking inside the brain, you're measuring very non-invasively, you're observing brain activity, and that can be very important because there could be some problems inside the brain. If you're looking at it structurally, you don't notice or see that there are issues, but it's not functioning properly. So what is the readout on this? You can look at it on a computer screen today. They can do some computerized things, but mostly it's a readout where you get a printer, a little series of pens on the printer are going to print out those theta, beta, whatever waves. And you can look at the state a person's in. Often this is for sleep disorders where you've got asleep, awake, anesthetized. The characteristic patterns are different, very different for these different states. So if you're looking at someone's EEG, you can see that. They have EEGs as well for like the heart. It's an electric deal, but we're looking at the brain here in brain scanning, so it's a little bit different. You probably have gotten, if you've ever had one of these, one done on your heart, which I've had that done before too. Turned out I just had like a pulled muscle. I thought I was having a heart attack, but what do I know? Major drawback is it cannot show us the structural anatomy of the brain. So, but what it does well. And we have other things that can, like the CAT scan, the CT/CAT scan, or computed tomography. This uses X-rays, but it uses the X-rays to create a 3D or three-dimensional image. So it's a nice view of the soft tissue as well as the denser bone structures. I've had a few of these done, like when I first went in for my first really big bad MS attack where I couldn't even sit up in bed and could barely move. I had troubles with my hands. It was really a bad flare-up. So, and this was when I didn't know it was wrong. So they took me to I went to the hospital. One of the first things they did was a CAT scan, because they're trying to see, is there something structurally out of whack in the brain. Of course, as soon as the guy came back, he put you in the tube there, and then he walks back behind the door and runs the test, and then he comes back. And as soon as he came back, I said, I already know what's going on, so you don't really have to tell me. I have two. And the guy was like, what? It was like 4 o'clock in the morning too. It was like really late in the morning. maybe not 4 o'clock, but it was pretty late in the morning. And he said, 2 of what? I said, well, I have 2 cats. So yeah, he didn't really laugh, but maybe, I don't know. Some people don't get my humor. Sad for them. So how does it work? You're lying in there. I don't know that you're lying in there as relaxed as this guy. I mean, he looks like he's just, I don't know, catching some rays at the beach. I don't know what he's doing there. I mean, I when I'm in there, I'm going, you know. But it gives you a 3D view of the body. And here's the cool thing. It can be like 100 times what a standard X-ray is. So you're getting a lot of radiation, a lot of X-ray, because it's doing this 3D thing. So, you know, if you get a CAT scan, they typically are going to monitor that to see, you know, how much radiation you've been given. This doesn't typically cause an issue for people, and the health risk benefit is definitely in your favor of being able to know what's going on inside the body if you're having issues or problems. But the number of CT scans in the United States has risen from the mid-90s to 2006, 2007 in dramatic ways. You can see it on the screen there. Not that you need to know that, but they use it quite a lot. And I think it's gotten potentially, I'm not certain, but I would think it's cheaper than the MRI process because it's just a lot simpler machine. So you're getting cross-sectional images, and they're used for diagnostic and therapeutic purposes in various medical disciplines. And you're going to generate this image of the inside of the object from a large two-dimensional X-ray. And it's rotating around. That's what the tube is for. But this is a simple tube compared to the magnets inside the MRI, which we'll see in a second, is totally different. The PET scan is short for positron emission tomography. This is radioactive glucose to see the functioning of the brain. Where is activity occurring in the brain? I've had some PET scans, but not on the brain. I had some issues with an injury to my stomach when I was in high school, and I think I'm almost certain that's what they did. Maybe it was not quite a PET scan yet, but it seemed like it was. I mean, they gave me some radioactive glucose. I remember that process. But anyway, if you take this, it's going to help light up these areas of the brain. You can see where brain processing is occurring. So again, it's activity. So the last one, the CAT scan, is this activity? No, it's structure. And the EEG, what was that? Activity. So kind of keep those things in mind as we're going through here. Typically, questions on the test will focus in on what's the reasoning behind having one of these scans done. Are you looking for structure, or are you looking to try to see the function or activities that are happening inside a person's brain? This is real interesting here. And I grabbed this from a website that was showing the PET scans of NFL players and then a control person. So you see the control person on the left there. They're obviously not an NFL player. That wouldn't be a control person. So the coronal and transaxial PET scan that they're doing here are scans of retired NFL players. 59-year-old linebacker, 64-year-old quarterback, 73-year-old guard. You know, they go through the list here, and you can see some of these guys have had major concussion problems. Number 5 was a 45-year-old center who suffered 10 concussions and complained of light sensitivity, irritability, decreased concentration after the last 2 concussions. And you can kind of see that his brain activity is looking much more different than, say, number 3 is a guard with dementia and depression. He has also issues and problems, doesn't he? But look over here. What are we looking at? The amygdala is in the center here. So who has issues with depression and maybe issues with emotional disorder or problems? Somebody that's going to have the amygdala highlighted there that may be really a big part of the problem. And remember, here's your control group, and it just looks like sort of a normal brain image. What these NFL players are showing is all the degradation of the brain. It seems like it's taken on quite a lot of damage. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in terms of depression and some of the other psychological issues that people can have, and sometimes physical problems are what brings those on. So PET scan is the positron emission tomography, like we're saying. Here's a couple other like really cool things you can do with this. The image on the right is showing you sort of the layers, similar to the layers that we looked at with an MRI in class. But the PET scan and the MRI are kind of compared there below. You know, you can kind of see that there's an issue on the MRI, but you're not really sure maybe what the level of it is. On the PET scan, it really shows up pretty well. So on the left, on this left side, you'll see a brain that is seeing words and reading words, and then on the right side of that image at the top is, and I need to point this way. I always get this backwards. The top left up there, the hearing words. So the PET scan on the left shows two areas of the brain, red and yellow, that are becoming accurate or active when a volunteer reads words on a video screen. The primary visual cortex and an additional part of the visual system, both in the back and left hemisphere. So this gives you an idea of like how they know where certain functions are occurring in the brain too. Let's look at MRI. This is magnets and radio waves that show you the structure of the soft tissue. And I know we've talked about this in class, and I asked, you know, how many have had one of these done. It's always surprising to me. That number in every class seems to grow each year. If you have an issue or problem, I think today they're more likely to put you in an MRI and see what's going on structurally pretty quickly. And that's maybe a good thing. I mean, there are some people who believe that if you had an MRI every few years, you'd be able to determine lots of issues that were going on in your body. So who knows? I mean, it seems to be a massively expensive thing to do. I'm not sure what benefit you're going to get out of it, and maybe some. So there's a cutaway of the MRI scanner on the right. You got the radio frequency coil, and I'm guessing this is the sound that it's making when I'm in there that drives me completely crazy. You've got the magnet in there that is just massively large. The gradient coils, oh yeah, the patient who is in this little tiny tube, and then the patient table. At the bottom, the standard MRI machine is shown, and then maybe a different view of it. Maybe you can see some things you couldn't see in the other one a little bit better. I mean, I don't know. If you've had one, you know what it's like. It's you lose track of time in there. It just seems like you're in there for a long, long time, and it can kind of start playing games in your mind. The best MRIs I've had are the ones where they've had a communication device linked up, where someone's in the control room where they're seeing all the images on the computer and they're being loaded, where they can press a button and say, okay, this is your third scan out of 6 or whatever, and then okay, this is the last scan, and then we're going to pull you out and put the contrast in, which is the radioactive stuff. We'll talk about that in a second here. Here's a really good couple images that show you what the MRI can do. So as you're looking through there, I mean, I joked about this in class. I look at my MRI and I think I can figure out what's wrong with my brain. Well, you know, this takes years of training to look at it and understand it, and just being able to pull out the contrast in the image itself, or to be able to focus it the way you'd want, is pretty difficult to see. But anytime I get an MRI, I ask for the DVD, and they usually give it to you if you ask. I mean, you're paying a lot of money for it. It's kind of cool to be able to sit and look at it. And I know some of you are probably going to skip right past this slide because you don't like looking inside people's heads, but it's pretty fascinating when it's your head. It's pretty interesting to look at. It does make me a little ill after a while. I have to kind of be careful. But you get your sequential sections from an MRI of the brain. It concurrently shows the slices through the transverse, sagittal, and coronal planes. So from left to right, that's what you're seeing. Transverse is on the left, sagittal is in the middle, and then the coronal plane is on the right. But the MRI makes the use of the property of nuclear magnetic imaging, NMR, to image nuclei of atoms inside the body. That's why you're really seeing, you know, that soft tissue approach. And with the brain, and with my situation with multiple sclerosis, you can see where there's scarring because it shows up as white, a white dot or series of dots, but that sclerosis or scarring. But MRI can create more detailed images of the human body than are possible with X-rays, and there are some different methods of MRIs. This is the fMRI, the functional neuroimaging procedure, and this, and you see it's in red, isn't it? If we back up here, the thing at the top, it was in brown, because what are we doing here? you're looking at the structure of soft tissue with an MRI. Are you really seeing much functioning at that time? Not really. You're sitting in a tube with an MRI and they're just taking a snapshot of what your brain looks like currently. But with the fMRI, you can measure brain activity by detecting associated changes in the blood flow. And this is very important because the area of the brain that's going to be in use, that the person is calling upon to understand or to compute in their brain what they need to do, whether it's verbal, whether it's just their consciousness or imagination or whatever, when an area of the brain is in use, blood flow to that region will increase. And since the early 1990s, the fMRI has come to dominate brain mapping research. So this is a really big field, and it's expanding, and the things that they're doing in this field has been groundbreaking and like amazing. I mean, I would think that there's going to be something further down the road from fMRI, but it's based on this kind of technology where, I mean, I don't know, when I was in high school, I would watch Star Trek or whatever, and they would do the little scan with their little, I don't know, device. They would scan you. They'd turn their little device on here and they'd go, and he'd scan a person. They'd say, oh, okay, he's healing at this percent or this rate, and they'd be able to administer treatment through that little device. And it all looked like silliness. Like there's no way you would ever be able to do that. Well, maybe not so silly, because like if you could do this with a cell phone, you can't, but if you could do it in some way where you could see what's going on in someone's brain, the fMRI has shown us that you can kind of predict people's behavior. You can, or not predict people's behavior, but predict what they're thinking about. So in many ways, you can read someone's mind with this machine. Of course, you have to have them in an fMRI to do this, and that would be kind of difficult to do, but the computer can do it. And here are the images here, and we discussed this a little bit in class, but this is really good. If I explain it to you, hopefully you'll understand what I'm saying here. Response to faces is on the left side, and then on the right side is the response to houses. And the fMRI images are from a study that's showing the parts of the brain lighting up when they see houses, and other parts light up when they're seeing faces. And you may look at that mess on the screen and think, nah, it looks like pretty much the same thing. But the computer can determine if they're correlated, if they're matches. So for example, if you asked a person in the fMRI to think of a house, or you show them a picture of a house, and they're going to comprehend that potentially, that, hey, that's a house. It lights up a certain area of the brain, and the computer can kind of map or match that. If you ask somebody to think of a person in their face, or you show them a picture of a face, other areas of the brain light up. So then consequently, if you have someone thinking in the fMRI machine about their house, they're picturing their house, the computer can predict what they're thinking about, because it'll see that same area of the brain light up. Here's the really cool part, and I think we've mentioned this in another video, but pretty much for every person that gets tested, they have the similar areas of the brain lighting up. We're thinking about what a house is and where people's faces are in the same spots in our brain. The average person would definitely do that. So these R values are the correlations. The higher positive or negative values are indicating a better match. And you can kind of see where the matches are, and it matches what we've been talking about. So one last time, I don't think we have the ability here to cognitively detect whether or not we're going to have crimes occur, like they could do here with the movie Minority Report. But there are some fascinating ways we can look inside the brain. And keep in mind, the EEG, the PET, and the fMRI are definitely looking at activity. And the CT, the CAT scan, and the MRI are looking at more of a structural approach. Okay, that's all for this time, and hopefully you've got a better understanding of how we can get inside someone's brain. A lot of people have been asking me that this year. It seems to be like a common thing. You guys have taken this course because you want to get inside people's brains. Well, what if you got in there and you didn't know what you were looking at? Now, at least, we have a functional way of depicting what that is. See you next time. DFTBA.